You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special guest with Cecil Bohanon. He is a economics professor at Ball State University, and he is also a columnist on economic topics as well. And we're going to talk with him about some of his favorite topics today, which is, kind of what's going on with this whole RFK thing going on in the in the 2024 election, and could he wind up running as a libertarian? And then we're going to talk about slipping standards and rising prices in education. And then we're also going to talk about inflation as well. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So let's jump right into it with our Liberty. Well, in fact, before we do that, let me just show you a little bit of background stuff on Cecil. So here is Cecil's page for Ball State University, so you can go check out a little more there. And if you want to read some of Cecil's articles as well, you can check out the Indiana Business Journal. And he puts out an article every week or so on there. So you can go check that out as well. So let's jump into our Liberty quote of the day, which is kind of related to some of what we're going to be talking about here. And this time we're going with John Quincy Adams. And what he said is something about our whole two-party system, which, libertarians would thoroughly agree with him on. That's it. There is nothing I dread so much as the division of the republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This is, in my humble opinion and humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution. Yeah, as a libertarian, it seems like they do everything they can to get us off the ballot. What do you guys think about that quote?
Oh gosh, what a great way to start it, Jason. That's exactly right. I don't know. It seems to me every now and then a third party can kind of make a breakaway, but they've never done it at a national level for the presidency, unless you count 1860, because the Republican Party, that was only the second time it ran, and it won. And there were like four major candidates that were running. So maybe that's the last time a third party ran. We've seen third parties in our lifetime. And what the usual trajectory is everybody gets excited about the third party candidate. The third party candidate goes up in the polls. And about September, people end up concluding it becomes a two-man race. And then the third party just sort of collapses. Ross Perot, I was looking this up just before the show, actually was leading in a poll in June against Bill Clinton and George Bush. He was actually polling more in a sort of poll. But then he crapped out and ended up with only 18% and no electoral votes at all. The last time
Cecil, let me hold you right there, since you brought up Ross Perot. I actually have a very short video clip of Ross Perot so people can become familiar, in case like you happen to be a young spring chicken and have no idea who we're talking about here. But this is from 1992. And James, this is KOL number 4. So we're taking this one out of order.
The dollar's gone through the floor. Now, whose fault is that? Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. Somewhere out there, there's an extraterrestrial that's doing this to us, I guess. And everybody says they take responsibility. Somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for this. Now, just for the record, I don't have any spin doctors. I don't have any speech writers. Probably shows. I make those charts you see on television even. That shows.
And so that last one was a clip of one of the charts that he was sort of famous for pulling out all of these charts to try and inform people with, a little bit of data, which I guess economists like, but a lot of the public apparently doesn't.
He ended up getting 18% when he ran again. The next election cycle, 96, down to 8%. So it's one of those things that flamed up and came down. I remember, and this is even older, but you probably remember this, Leon, the 1968 election. Last time a third party got electoral votes, it was George Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And
but I wasn't in the United States in '68. But I know the story though. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and he was at 20% in the polls in September, but then he ended up with only 13%.
Right.
Our favorite libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, he was up in double digits in August and September. He was at 10, 11%, and I think a lot of us thought he might make it, but then the Aleppo statement. He said,
in fact, James,
he
maybe you could show the visual on this while Cecil is talking here. Keep talking, Cecil. Hopefully, James will bring up the visual for us.
Yeah, deer in the headlights. Look, oh gosh, and it just collapsed. And he ended up getting 3% of the vote, which is the best libertarians have ever done, or any third party since Ross Perot. But still, that was the thing. What is Aleppo?
I was so disappointed with what happened there on that Aleppo thing because, Gary Johnson got that question. It really felt like they were kind of trying to sandbag him. But the right answer for a libertarian, it felt like to me, would have been, well, the reason I'm not aware of, like most of America, where Aleppo is because I don't want to police the world. I want to focus on America. Instead, he sat there and apologized and said, oh, it was a shame that he didn't know what Aleppo was. And he just went up profusely. And then it played right into the narrative that he shouldn't be president. So.
Right. Yeah. But see, this is the danger that we have here in the United States. Among us is this soundbite, the kind of the soundbite presidency, because unless you can come up with a good soundbite, you can't seem to get elected, or if by chance, as Ron Johnson did, Gary Johnson did, if you're getting that to the second thing where you can't remember something, or you have a total mental block or whatever, like Johnson and also that guy from Texas, he was the governor of Texas. He couldn't remember which department he wanted to get rid of. What was his name? Perry, something Perry.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. He couldn't remember. He couldn't remember what department he wanted to get rid of.
And he wanted to. Yeah, he had all these ideas for eliminating departments, and he didn't even know what the departments were.
Yeah. Rick Perry. Rick Perry is the guy I'm talking about. But the point is, though, when you have these 30-second song bites, whether it's positive or negative, it seems to affect, and I will not even say seem to affect, it affects your outcome at the end of the day. So my question then is, Cecil, though, this phenomena where we're seeing people flying up in the polls. I mean, Rick Perry at one time was leading in the Republican primaries. You see these people rising high in the polls, showing great promise, and then somewhere along the way, for some reason, they flame out, and we get back to our two-party system,
right,
of Republican and Democrat. Why do we see this phenomena consistently?
Well, it could be. I mean, maybe that's the point. People like to be able to play in the big leagues. You got to have enough either heft in terms of reputation or just slickness to be able to deal with all that. Maybe that's it. And so almost by definition, look at the marginal people that run for Republican nomination, Democratic nomination. They often flame and come out. And it's just sort of a testing thing. So maybe that's it. You need some Teflon on it. But I think it's just people usually like to put it down to a two-person race. And that becomes it. And it's like, oh, I want to be in this two-person race. And so even though I like the third guy or gal, I can't vote for that because that'd be throwing my vote away. Of course, that's nonsense.
Right.
In the sense that, I don't know, every year I vote. I do. And I always go to the state office and the county office and take my vote out after the election tally's all been done and see if it made any difference. And it doesn't make a damn bit of difference in terms of the outcome. If I hadn't voted, nothing would have happened. If I changed my vote, nothing would have happened. Well, use your vote to send a signal for what you really believe, because you're not likely to be decisive in the outcome. But people don't do that. I think it's like they want to be for the winner of the World Series, and it comes down to one or two, and you jump to that. The thing that I think was interesting is the 1912 election. And, we don't have public opinion polls for back then, what was going on beforehand. And there wasn't radio and there wasn't television. But that was the closest since, if you don't count Abraham Lincoln as being the third party, that a third party came to winning with Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Roosevelt got more votes than Taft did. And that was not only just popular votes, it was also electoral votes. Roosevelt carried Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, California, and a couple of other states, and got 88 in the Electoral College. 1912 was really interesting because I think it's the saddest time for libertarians. You basically had three progressives running, and probably the most palatable one would have been Taft. But he created the Federal Reserve, my God. What can you say? You can't be one of our heroes. And then you had Woodrow Wilson, who was a progressive and a racist.
Yes.
And then you had Teddy Roosevelt, who was, what can you say about Teddy? He ended up doing a lot, I think, of damage with antitrust and with just the whole progressive thrust that came in the into the 19th century and the early 20th century. But that said, Teddy Roosevelt ran a campaign and split the Republican Party. And if anything, he could have won. And why he ended up eclipsing Taft, maybe if the campaign had been a little longer, Taft could have collapsed. In which case, what would happen is those Republicans probably would have gone to TR, and you may well have had Teddy Roosevelt as the first third-party president. Now, this is my scenario, and I think it's a super long shot because I don't think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a Teddy Roosevelt. But you never know.
Well,
you never know.
Before we get into talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., let me kind of clue the audience in a little bit to who he is in case you're not sure who he is at this point. So, James, can I bring up the visual real quick? So, Robert F. Kennedy, he did try to run at the beginning of this as a Democrat. And then he found out that the Democrats simply would not tolerate any competition this year. So he did. So then he realized, okay, the only way I can run now is if I go as an independent. So he actually came out and he announced as an independent first. And so, James, I have two video clips and we'll play one, we'll break in, and then we'll play the other. But it's KOL 1, where he talks about his vision of why he's running as an independent. So, James, can you play KOL 1?
That people like yourselves are finally fed up. Something is stirring in us that says it doesn't have to be this way. And they remind me that this country is ready for a history-making change. They are ready to reclaim their freedom, their independence. And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to declare myself an independent candidate. An independent candidate for President of the United States. That's not all. I'm here to join you in making a new Declaration of Independence for our entire nation.
So I just wanted to let the audience know that I did have to clip that in a few places. One of them was when he announced the cheering went on for about 25 seconds or so. So I clipped a lot of that cheering out just because we'd be just sitting here listening to a crowd cheering all that time. But it's interesting, that he's talking about independence. Now I want to play a little bit of what he's saying that this Declaration of Independence is that he's actually after. And so we got a second clip for that, and that's KOL 2. James, can you play that?
We declare independence from the corporations that have hijacked our government. And we declare independence from Wall Street, from big tech, from big pharma, from big ag, from the military contractors and their lobbyists. And we declare independence from the mercenary media that is here to fortify all of the corporate orthodoxies from their advertisers and to urge us to hate our neighbors and to fear our friends. And We declare independence from the cynical elites who betray our hope and who amplify our divisions. And finally, we declare independence from the two political parties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that speech was actually, that was an excerpt from a much longer speech, but I felt like that would give enough flavor of what his campaign is supposed to be about. As that first visual I was showing, James, maybe you could bring that back up again. Running as an independent doesn't actually offer ballot access, and so now he's flirting with the Libertarian Party. And so at that point, I'm going to hand this over to you guys to talk about a little more, sort of what this means, I guess. And of course, we have a convention happening in California in a few days, and he's going to be one of the speakers here at our convention. I won't be there, but maybe after I retire, hopefully in a few years, I can start attending these things. But anyways, he's Robert Kennedy's going to be there speaking in the same rough voice I have right now because I have a cold. Of course, that's that's a feature though for Kennedy. So, anyways, what do you guys think about Kennedy in this big run, breaking away, sort of a scion of the Kennedy family, breaking away from the Democrats and running as potentially trying to run as a libertarian? They haven't made an agreement yet, so.
Of course, I think it's ironic when he said we need to break away from elites that have entrenched power. Who has more elite entrenched power than a Kennedy? Right?
And the Kennedys, yes. You took the words out of my mouth, Cecil. You took the words out of my mouth. Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think his path, there's two issues. One, would the libertarians accept it? I don't know what it is in California, but here in the Midwest, the libertarians I talk to say, no, he is so off the farm in terms of certain things he's come out for in his past. And it's not just the anti-vax stuff, because a lot of libertarians are into that, but it's his argument that people that, quote, deny global warming should be thrown in prison. He's made arguments like that. So how can libertarians embrace that? I think it would be very odd, but they might. And again, he has a reason to go to libertarians because libertarians are on the ballot in 50 states. And a lot of libertarians might say, heck, we've waited our whole life for a chance to do this. This is our breakaway. So
and just to jump in real quick. Well, just to jump in real quick, he had a popular showing at Pork Fest, which occurred last year, and that's one of the big annual libertarian meetings that happens in New Hampshire, and I guess he was pretty popularly received there. So it's not, it really is sort of a rift in the in the Libertarian Party. Whether people want to have that name recognition or whether they want to stick to principles.
Well, sure. I mean, and that's the same thing that happened in 2016 with William Weld. There are a lot of people who say he's too much of a statist, and there's an argument for that. I see that. But I think that's always been a question in the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement, as I understand, between purity and actually maybe winning an election sometime, So that's the deal. So that might happen. My scenario would be, okay, Biden gets more feeble and Trump gets crazier. So all of a sudden, Bobby Kennedy Jr. becomes possible. Let's say he can get New England, all the East Coast. He can get the left coast. All of a sudden, he's in contention. Then he pulls out Illinois, and Teddy Roosevelt almost carried Illinois. Okay. And he pulls out the other states that Teddy Roosevelt carried, which was Wisconsin, Michigan. He's getting pretty close. And then Trump wins the Southland, the sort of conservative Midwest. Kennedy pulls off, I don't know, New Mexico, maybe Colorado. Biden just spirals down, and he, like Robert Taft, President Taft, what was it him? Howard. Yeah, Howard Taft. He got two states. He got Vermont and he got Utah. Well, my scenario would be Biden gets Delaware and District of Columbia. And that's it. And then once people begin to understand that, then his popular vote, who knows, the Democratic Party popular vote for the president goes down under 20%. And it does become a two-person race between Kennedy and Trump. I think there's a 5% chance of that.
5%. Okay.
But it could happen. You sometimes get a straight flush every now and then, or three kings. What can you say? That can happen.
So anyway, so I'm gonna, full disclosure, I have a real bias against the Kennedys. Period. Okay. Okay. So I just have to say that. And while I like some of the words that I hear from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., some of the things he have also said, and he just pointed out one of them, Cecil, that to me, no libertarian or no liberty-minded person should associate themselves with. So could a RFK Kennedy make a difference out there? Maybe. But I don't think I want to be associated with this man.
Yeah.
I really don't.
I couldn't vote for him. I couldn't vote for him.
Right. I couldn't.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will have a real problem with him if he emerges as something that represents the liberty-minded or the libertarians.
Yeah. I think it would be kind of the death knell of the Libertarian Party if they did that. I think they kind of lose their soul in that. But the Republican Party apparently is willing to lose its soul. Very open to doing that, and so that's the case. And where that leaves us, I don't know. The other thing that again sort of echoes from 1912, I saw that the Libertarians Fest, you had two other candidates. Jill Stein was there, and who else?
So Cornel West and Jill Stein will be speaking.
Cornel West.
In fact, I can bring up the visual, James, if you want to bring it up. I just happen to have it on this particular tab again. And so there's these are sort of the headliners. And then
David Friedman. Yeah, well, he's real, yeah.
Yep, and then now we're starting to get into the real libertarians down
here. Right.
But some of these, by the way, we've interviewed a few of these on the show. We've had Jacob Hornberger, Mike Tremont has been on the show, Lars Mapstead. Yeah. So they're all going to be there. And we've even had Larry Sharp on the show a few times. So that's and I've heard a few people really kind of miffed about this, the fact that the Libertarian Party is focusing these people when they're not really libertarians. It's sort of like hey, let's get excited about liberty and bring on a bunch of non-liberty candidates.
This is my problem. This is my problem. Okay, honestly, and that you're raising a very good point. Jason. Cornel West in particular. Okay. Fine. He seemed like a fine gentleman, somebody I could probably go out and have a beer with, even though I don't drink beer anymore.
Right.
But the point is, though, Cornel West is a Marxist, well known, well documented. I don't know why we would want to associate the Libertarian Party with him. I really don't.
Yeah. It's one thing to say I'm going to bring a speaker in, though, and I think that would be the saving grace, is that the Libertarian Party is open enough to say anybody can speak here.
Right.
And it's sort of a commitment to free speech. Let's see what this guy says. I remember, it was 40 years ago, I ran for Congress, and there was a guy that went to a couple of the debates that I got invited in that had been a socialist candidate. And I think he was on one of the debates because he was a write-in candidate. And we kind of had an affinity, being the big outsider. So there is something to that, I suppose. So, no, I don't see how the Libertarian Party could endorse Cornel West. I don't agree with much of what he has to say, but he says it very well, and he seems like an honorable man. The thing that's interesting, again, this echoes from 1912. There was a fourth candidate in 1912, aside from Woodrow Wilson, aside from Howard Taft, who was the incumbent, and aside from Teddy Roosevelt, who was the Bull Moose progressive Republican. And that was Eugene Debs, who was a socialist.
Yes.
And he didn't carry any state, but he got 6% of the vote, which is a pretty big chunk. And you wonder where those votes would have gone. And the thing that's fascinating, guess which states he got the most votes in? This is an avowed open socialist, and he's running for president of the United States. What two states in the 1912 election did he get 18% of the vote in?
It looks like I'm going to flub this final Jeopardy question.
That's fine. I love it. That's why I brought it up.
Me too.
The answer is, of all things, Nevada and Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
What you think is those are not bastions of socialism today.
Wow. Okay.
But there were 3 counties in southern Oklahoma that voted for Eugene Debs.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
wonder if there would be some county somewhere that would vote for Cornel West. That'd be kind of fun. Maybe Berkeley would, you know? Maybe whatever county that's in California, or maybe Cambridge would vote for it in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to see these echoes. And with all these things, it could be, and again, I put this 1 in 20, 1 in 10 shot. You could get a real change. Of course, that's what RFK's saying. We can do this. We can have a real change if everybody will be willing to give up the monopoly of the R's and D's. And stranger things have happened.
Well, and my thought is that, we might actually get somebody like him this time because, one of the things that's sorely missing in this country right now is that we are just toxically divided between the
Yeah.
two parties.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
RFK, actually, that's the one bright side to him. I mean, I actually think long term that would be a bad thing because he's going to come in and he's going to help mend the country, but he's also going to be pitching socialism at the same
Right.
time, and therefore,
Right.
we're just going to go farther down the hole in the long run.
Anyway,
But in the short term, though, I think that it would be a big healing Band-Aid for the country to get somebody like him in there. So, that's just my thoughts on the man.
I don't know.
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Cecil. Please go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Leon.
Yeah. I don't know, Jason, honestly, my biggest issue right now is the federal government is waging war upon the citizens of the United States. They really are. Look at the attacks on free speech through social media. Look at all the persecution that is going on. Look, I'm not here to defend Donald Trump, but he's an American citizen. Look at what they're trying to do to this man. Okay? They're trying to put the man out of business in New York right now as we speak. Okay? So now, he might be a crazy or say some lunatic things or whatever it is. But if they're going to go after this man, an ex-president, regardless of what you think of the man, he's an American citizen with rights just like us. And they're trying to put him out of business in New York. And you could go on and on. The attacks on the Second Amendment, the attacks on the Fourth Amendment. You could go on and on and on. The federal government is waging war upon us. That is my major issue.
Let me jump in real quick here because on time, we're just about to leave our public access audience. So if you're watching us on public access, this conversation is going to continue, and you can hear Cecil's thoughts on, where the standards are going with higher education, and also. And we'll talk a little about inflation, which is going to be a big topic in this 2024 election as well. But if you want to continue to watch, you got to jump on to Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, or Rumble, and you can catch the rest of this conversation or many of the other conversations we've had with interesting people fighting for liberty around the country and in your neighborhood. So I guess back to the show. So go ahead with the thoughts you guys had there.
Oh, Leon, I agree with you. Leon, you're great. Because you're right. One of the things I thought was so prescient. I don't remember what quote. I mean, you guys do. You get all kinds of feeds from all kinds of people, and you read all kinds of stuff because that's just what we do today. One very conservative organization that you'd think would be very pro-Trump. Of course, I'm not sure if Trump's a conservative. I don't know what he is.
No, he's not.
It condemned the prosecutor that ended up saying, well, we're not going to indict Biden, but he's a senile old man.
Yeah. Yes.
And I thought, well, how come these people that love Trump are doing that? And what they ended up saying was, this is a bad thing. The Justice Department of the United States is routinely being weaponized. And it's not just against Trump. Trump will do it too. And you just given me, Jason, if RFK would come in and say, I'm going to stop that stuff. And maybe he's going to take us down a socialist path, single payer system, raise taxes and all that. But if he'd stop that politicization of the judge, we're turning into a third world country or a small town or a junior high school.
A banana republic, yes.
Trying to get the other place.
And quite frankly, that's one of the things I think that's most endearing about RFK is that for anybody who's watched his campaign, they know that much like Vivek Ramaswamy and some of these other new types of candidates, he's fairly fearless in talking about issues. Like he'll go just about anywhere and be open to have honest conversations, which is, I mean, it's like we don't get that anymore from the major two parties. So it's really refreshing to hear. But he has clearly said that he believes in the Democratic Party of FDR, and so that's not a libertarian party. Just in case.
FDR brought us the New Deal, and then Lyndon Johnson put it with the Great Society.
Yeah.
both of which were disasters. But the point that I will leave this conversation, this part of our show with, is that anyone who will convince me that they're sincerely going to take on the federal government in terms of what it is doing, the weaponization, which Cecil just mentioned, anyone who is willing to take that on, I don't care now, maybe if it's RFK and he's going to say he's going to raise my taxes and he's going to do that other crap, I will be willing to suspend that thought in my head, which I'm so horribly against. I will suspend it and I will vote for that person if they could convince me that this is
that's what he's really going to do. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. David Beto, who's a libertarian writer, scholar, he wrote a book about how FDR didn't quite follow personal liberty, and he did a lot to the First Amendment and used the federal government to persecute lots of folks. And remember, what was it? Yesterday is the anniversary of the day FDR put all the Japanese in internment camps.
Yes.
So he was no lover of liberty. So that makes me a little suspicious about RFK, but I really enjoyed this discussion with you, Jason and Leon, because you have raised the point. Just de-weaponizing the Justice Department and getting back to a Justice Department that just wants to be a Justice Department, and not a political hack group that's trying to go after people. Which I think, I agree with you, Leon. I don't like Trump at all. I think he's crazy. I think he's done some really bad things, but it's not necessarily indictable. You don't take it to court. One of the wisest things that ever got done, and I resented it at the time, is when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. That was a very wise decision. Because, okay, Nixon was a crooked, he'd done bad things, but we didn't drag the country through this for another 10 years.
Right,
and I think in retrospect, that was a good thing that Gerald Ford did it. Though at the time I hated it. I thought, that's just terrible.
Yeah. Well, speaking of slipping standards in our country, let's talk a little bit about the education system. That might actually be at the root of why we are so discombobulated on what we want out of our government as well. So, James, maybe you can bring up this paper that Cecil. I know this is. I think Mark Horowitz is one of your.
No, that's actually Steve is my deceased colleague. I don't think Mark's related to him at all, but it's interesting.
Okay. Okay. Well, I know you wanted to talk about this paper, and so this particular paper focuses on inflating grades and I guess diluting the metrics as far as what goes in. And what they've done is they've gone and they've surveyed a bunch of professors at a whole bunch of universities, and they're trying to get their take on, hey, are the standards declining? And of course, the costs are going up at the same time as well. In fact, I even have something I pulled out of the Fred for this too. This is just a CPI on personal consumer expenditures on higher education, and man, I mean, you can see the slope, that's going up here from 1980 and beyond. This is just disturbing. I'm not sure if this is the best graph that we could have used, because I kind of pulled this up at the last minute, but I tell you, I mean, it does seem like the prices are just skyrocketing in higher ed. And of course, we've all seen some of the shenanigans Biden's tried to pull with, kind of like buying votes by essentially paying off people's educational bills and stuff that they've gotten from the system. But it's just kind of seems unsustainable. And not only that, are we even getting anything for the money? And maybe Cecil, this is a great place for you to kind of jump in on this, I guess.
Oh gosh, let me jump in on this. And this is going to be, I don't want this to be poor Cecil, but I've been at Ball State University since 1980. One of the reasons I went to Ball State is, okay, I think getting better academic standards and making a school better is a noble thing. It's good to kind of compete and try to get better students, have more rigorous courses, have higher academic standards. And in the Midwest, one of the public schools is known as being very good is in Ball State's conference, Miami of Ohio, which has a very stellar reputation as being a really good, almost like private school that's a public school. And I thought, well, I'm going to go to Ball State. We're going to help make it like that. We're going to aspire to be this really good place. 2 years ago, I figured out, looking at Ball State standards, they've gone up and then they go down. They go up and they go down. And what's that all about? It's all about enrollment. when there's a lot of kids that want to get into school, universities can raise the standards, and they do. But when there is a dearth of people that are of that age group, what do? They reduce the standards. Now, this is simple economics. It all makes sense. I don't know why I question my discipline and what, logic tells me is true, but I find it very disappointing, And that's exactly what we're going through right now in higher education. We've got an enrollment cliff. And the enrollment cliff's not going to really wane until 2030. You just don't have that many 18-year-olds. And that's the traditional market. And there's nothing you can do to create new 18-year-olds for 2025. They're there, right? You can't get more of them. And so universities are doing anything they can to get more people in. But the other thing that's going on is a lot of people, particularly males, are saying, the heck with that. Why do I want to go to university? Maybe I can get a certification. Maybe I can do something else. Maybe I don't need a college education. So what's happening is a lot of people, not only is the pool getting smaller, but the percentage coming from the pool that is actually choosing to go into higher education, that's shrinking too. So administrators are going crazy. We got a directive, and it's just discussion, but I can say this. It's a directive of you can't have any more than 30% D, Fs, and Ws in your class. Because if you're doing that, you're being too hard and you're not facilitating student success. Well, there's a lot of classes that are hard,
Yes.
So what do you do to make classes more acceptable so that people pass more? You lower standards. And it's really very sad. And I see this happening at my university. I see it happening in my college. And the thing that gets me is what little resistance there is to it. And it's really, I think, very tragic. I don't know. I'm going to be 70 this year, so I'll probably be retiring pretty soon. But it was interesting in that article, Jason, because most everybody, majority of the people said that standards are going down in higher education. Grade inflation's real. And then another thing that I think is really interesting, I think it's also tragic, because the argument is that in higher education, minorities have been underrepresented. And that's probably right. That's true. But increasing minority representation, if the idea is we do this by reducing standards, that's an insult to everybody. And that makes nothing better.
Especially to the minorities that they're trying to supposedly help. This is such an insult.
It's insulting. Yeah. It's insulting to say, Black people don't know how to be on time and they can't do math. So we're going to forget about having any standards for timeliness or any math in the course.
Yes.
If I were in your shoes, I'd slap somebody who said that.
Yeah, Paul Leon, he's too black to understand math. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. And this is not a black or white thing. It's a thing of, do we want to have standards? And if you're not ready for it, it's a crime for universities to bring in people that aren't ready for things, take their money, put them in loans, and put them in a position where they can't succeed. And it's even as much of a crime to say, well, we're going to lower everything for everybody because we don't want anybody to fail. I mean, we're becoming a cruise ship.
Indeed.
That's the whole thing. College is a place where you go hang out and you have fun, and you maybe go to classes now and then because that's kind of fun.
That's right.
You go to lecture now and then. And
at least you have to get drunk. You have to get drunk a few times, and the next morning your headache, you can't go to class and stuff like that. Come on, what is that about? But this whole thing about lowering standards is not only in higher education. That is happening in K through 12 also. Absolutely. And this is a real problem. It's a real problem. Because we are doing nothing but creating failures out of kids who have great potential. Right. I mean, the people who should have been educated and who could probably be productive, whether they go to college or not, they could probably go into a trade or whatever they want. They could become productive. They are now turned out to be failures because of the education, the lowering of the standards. We are not holding kids to that standard that are necessary to achieve things. I mean, if you look at the story of Jaime Escalante in East Los Angeles,
LA,
East LA, one of the worst areas you could think about in Los Angeles. I used to live in that area at one time. One of the worst areas. Jaime Escalante went in there and taught these kids calculus, and they were successful. Yes. But somehow or the other, we have now reached a point in our society where this DEI nonsense is telling us, well, if you're black, you can't learn certain things. If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're Hispanic, you're something else. These little boxes and all the kind of stuff are dividing us and destroying our society at large.
Right.
That's what's going on.
Yeah.
This is so unfortunate and dangerous.
Yeah, and let's see, Leon, James, maybe you could bring up the visual real quick. This is actually the movie that was made, and so if we could give you a sense of something that you can actually watch and maybe gain a little inspiration from. The story of Stand Deliver was of a real teacher in East LA, and he brought calculus to an area that essentially the government had failed. I mean, they had said that these kids weren't capable, and that was literally his story, is that he went in there, and he was kind of like a retired aerospace guy, so it wasn't like this was his discipline. He just said, hey, this is what I want to do. So if not for him, there was probably several hundred kids whose lives were completely set on a different trajectory because of him. But I did want to mention too that we've been talking about the school failing people at the standards in there, and I think, Cecil, you briefly touched on this, but you have a paper or an article in the Business Journal, and you talk about debasing, and I like that, the learning measures, and it erodes the quality of education. I mean, we like to talk a lot as libertarians about debasing the money supply, but we're debasing the worth of what we're saying the education is worth, like that penny, that you're looking at. And, maybe it used to actually be able to buy something 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. And now it's just like people will melt those things down, for the metal. So it's just, it's kind of sad. And I know your article focused a little bit about, sort of which standards should, they be looking at as letting kids into the schools. But I mean, we've got these schools all now that are getting rid of the standards to let the kids in, because for lots of reasons. And of course, race is one of those metrics, because again, just like with the Jaime Escalante story, the government thinks that some people, because of the color of their skin, may not be up to the standards. And I mean, it's just it's a real that they're really selling them short. And this flips around on the other side of things too, because we had this Supreme Court case. Gosh, I'm trying to get the visual to show, but this is an article from the New York Post, and they talk about how they were rejecting Asian kids from going into Harvard because there were too many of them. And so it's like, let's change the metric again. And I found one of the most appalling metrics they talked about is they made up a whole new metric about a personality rating.
Yes.
And of course, then they said, oh, Asians just aren't as likable as other groups, and therefore we're going to count that against them. I can't think of a more racist thing to say to somebody than your skin color says you're less likable than other people. I mean, oh my God.
You're just not a fun guy.
Yeah.
And that's what we're not going to have. But people of another group, they're all fun people.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
What are you possibly thinking there? But no, it does. It all intertwines with that, because again, we've done this at my college. We used to have sort of, to graduate in the College of Business, you have to take statistics. And before you take statistics, you need to have a little calculus. Not a whole lot of calculus, just some. And certainly some algebra, and certainly some things like that. There's a course at our university that is a math course that doesn't require any calculus or any algebra, none at all. And our college ended up adopting that as our math standard. Now, I raised holy hell about it, right? But it didn't do any good. Everyone ended up buying into it. Well, we have to meet students where they are. They're just not very good at math. And my colleagues who actually teach the statistics course say they're going to have to just dummy down this statistics course significantly. Now, who's going to get hurt by that? It's going to be the kids when they go out and they're asked at their workplace to do something that's complicated and requires them to have analytical reasoning and know how to use statistical packages. They're not going to be exposed to it, because we don't want anybody to feel bad about not getting through algebra.
And this is just a point. I mean, you talk about a statistical package. I mean, even using like a simple thing like an Excel spreadsheet, which way you will have to write formulas and that kind of stuff to do. I mean, kids are don't even know this these days because of the same problem you just pointed out, Cecil. oh, we have to dumb them down. We have to be compassionate. We have to meet students where they, and all this damn nonsense that have nothing to do with education. Nothing.
Right. My dean, and I love her, I do, but she said, well, if a student has to take a class twice, that's not a seamless experience for them, and their parents aren't going to like it. And my argument is that they have to take it twice. Maybe they need to know it more.
That's right.
And you need to hold those standards up. And I know one of the most poignant experiences I ever had in the last 10 years at Ball State is I was out in the gym working out, and this kid comes up, oh, hi, Dr. Bohanon, how are you doing? And I recognized him from a large class I'd had. And I said, yeah, you were up in that group of guys. You guys were all rowdy. I had to tell you, shut up all the time. Some of you did really well. How did you do? And he says, oh, I flunked. I said, oh, really? And you're not going to slug me? He goes, oh, no. He says, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because I learned I had to come to class. I had to pay attention. I couldn't be goofing off. And the fact that I flunked and had to take it again, it's something that helped me. But we're not going to let that happen. You know, I have a colleague that apparently tells everybody in their class, nobody fails this class ever. Well, that's an invitation.
Yeah, but you know that's the ultimate in debasement, because what that winds up doing to that value of those degrees that come out, and it hurts the people who actually do learn it, is that people then, like Elon Musk, say, I don't even pay attention to the college degree anymore. I want you to show me what you can do. So they're not even using that anymore as a metric, some of these people, because they're saying, I'm failing to see the value in some of these degrees, is what they're saying.
Yeah,
so,
good point. No, you know who's really mad about this, aside from me and my colleagues in economics department and the better students here? Maybe it's bias on my part because who I hang out with. All the alumni in the college business are really upset about this. They say, this is going to make my degree 10 years from now look like crap. I'm going to be ashamed to be from Ball State.
I mean, the kind of things I hear, like, you know, like the things that they're doing in the high schools and the middle schools and that kind of stuff, that kids are now saying, well, the kids don't have to have homework, or the homework should be too difficult, or blah, 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 or they can't have homework on the weekends and all the kind of stuff and things like that. You know, I'll tell any kid today, if I tried that, I went home and tell my father, you know, that I can't learn calculus because I'm black, or because I don't have a black teacher, or because this, or because that. I wish I could have go home and tell my father that. What he would have done to me, I would have still feeling it on my ass today.
And you would have learned your calculus too.
Oh, damn right.
I had a very dear friend who was a student that he got through economics fine. You didn't have to do a lot of calculus in it, but he always said he wasn't any good at math. Then he went to graduate school and got in a program, and he had to learn some calculus. So he ended up buying a calculus book in June. He went through the problems, and he said, I went through them. I saw how they worked. I did another problem. I saw how it worked. I clicked in the key in the back and figured out how it worked. And I realized I was never not bad at math. I was just lazy. And he said, if you work at it, you can do it. And I think that's part of it. Maybe there's something that has a block for some kids psychologically, but you got to just sit down and do it. And people don't like that. I tell people in my economics classes, economics is really very interesting, a lot of good things going on, but it can be really tedious. But that's what it is. Life is tedious sometimes. That's just the way it is.
Sure,
and that's how you master something. You put up with that. But we're such instant gratification. Everybody's got to get a trophy. We don't want the kids to feel bad about themselves.
Right, exactly.
It's just toxic.
Well, that's the one thing about numbers in math, is that they generally don't lie. There's a lot of honesty in those professions. And so that kind of brings me to the next topic that we wanted to touch on, which is inflation and the honesty in the numbers behind our currency, I guess. So let's, James, maybe you could bring up the visual. So this will be a big topic because obviously we went through the whole pandemic, and obviously that had some impacts on our economy. A lot of flushing money into the economy, and of course, a lot of shutting down of production at the same time. So those things sort of work together towards inflation. But the numbers for inflation have been, This is one of before we jump into some of the numbers, I think this one video clip really illustrates kind of the misunderstandings or the struggling that people are having on both sides of the political aisle to understand what the whole inflation issue is about. And so that there was this discussion with Bill Maher and one of his guests the other day. And so I'm going to play a short clip of that. And James, that's KOL 5. So maybe you could bring that in.
This country came out of the pandemic way better. We won the pandemic economically. I mean, America.
Did? God, I don't feel that way. Explain it to me. I feel like inflation's insane.
Numbers. Inflation is not insane.
Bill,
go
buy a car.
There's numbers. I understand things,
A house
but it has
tripled here.
Look, I get that people
buy some fucking eggs. Explain it to me. I'm not an economist. There's
feelings, and then there's the numbers.
Okay, what are the numbers?
The numbers have come down a lot in the last 6 months.
Come down.
Yeah, so you can see, Bill's trying to put a shine on it for Biden because he wants to say how, hey, look, the numbers are coming down. But on the other hand, the consumer is struggling to understand, hey, I see these high prices. They're not coming down. But maybe they're not raising as fast. And that's kind of what some of this understanding is. And so let me bring a few statistics here to show. And Jane, maybe you could show some of this. So here is the Fred's CPI. For all urban consumers. And so you can kind of see how that, was sort of on a constant upward trajectory. But then once we hit that pandemic, boy, the curve, really got steep during that time. Let's see here. And this is what essentially the change in the consumer price index looked, just year over year, over a period of about the last 70 years or so, it looks like in this chart. And so you can see we had really bad inflation back around the time, Carter was leaving office, which is part of what contributed to Reagan being brought in. And now you can see that around 2020, right when we went into that whole pandemic, you started to see the impact of all of that extra money in the system and all of the stopping of production of goods, leading to, more money relative to less goods, but then you can also see that the inflation rate was coming down as well later on in the Biden presidency. And this is kind of some of the bad news they were talking about here. I think they were hoping this trajectory was going to keep heading down, and it sort of peaked up in around December and January, a little higher than what they were hoping for. So that's kind of what they're talking about, the bad news. But of course, the Fed is shooting for what is it, Cecil? 2% is what they're shooting for.
That's the magic word. It's 2%.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. And there's one more thing I wanted to say here too. And so if you want to know what this means in terms of prices, if you look at prices, this is an inflation calculator that we have here called inflationcalculator.com. So we put in 2019 and 2024, what a dollar would be, a good that you would have spent $1 on. Now you'd have to spend $1.21 for the same good is what they're saying. So that's essentially the disconnect. And of course, that's for an average because, we know maybe real estate might be a much different than say the price of eggs or something else. So anyways, so go ahead, Cecil.
Let me say two things. One, sticker shock. Consumers and assessing their state of the economy by the sticker shock stuff they buy. And if you don't buy stuff on a regular basis and all of a sudden it's wildly out of line with what your expectations are, you're pissed. I found this on Christmas Day that we needed some salt. Table salt. Well, nothing's open on Christmas. I'd gone to church and done the communion and all that, lay Eucharist minister. But I went to the local village pantry, which is a convenience store. A tub of salt, regular old Morton salt, and I would have bought the off-brand. I remember that being 15 cents. It was $4.25, and that was just like, wow, that's incredible. And so I think that's part of the reaction people have. Bill Maher is kind of right. But again, since prices don't go down, you still have to pay that much for the roast or the everyday item, and it's just irritating, and people feel bad about it. But the second thing I think is really important here is, again, like I said, 2%. The Federal Reserve has kind of pledged itself to saying our target inflation rate is going to be 2%. And they should continue to tighten until it hits that. We thought that maybe it could hit it like mid-year, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And so they're going to have to think things tighter for longer than what they anticipated. And we might not get the soft landing we hoped for. And that's kind of disappointing, but it's just, you never know what's going to happen there. It's not like a system that's completely controllable one way or another. The problem is that the Federal Reserve says we're not going to go for 2%. Instead, our target's going to be 3%, and we'll quit when we're at 3%. Then nobody believes the Federal Reserve for the next 50 years. And then the whole financial system worldwide. This is why it's so important the Fed stay at 2, in my opinion. That kind of stability is necessary. So you just have to bite the bullet and wait till you get to 2. But Biden's not going to like that, right?
Yeah, right.
He wouldn't like it either, right?
But that hard target, trying to get that hard target, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that hard target may push us into a recession.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, economists are very good at predicting recessions that haven't happened. And I'll say this as an economist, independent of my partisan perspective, I like it when the economy is doing well. I really want it to do well. I hope it does. But one indicator you might look at sometime, Jason, on the Fred dashboard, there's an inflation expectation calculation that they do that's based upon government bonds that are indexed against inflation, and then government bonds of the same term that are not indexed against inflation. The difference in interest rate is a very good indicator of what the market thinks future inflation is going to be. It got down in December to just above 2%, but it's gone up now to about 2.4. So the market's expecting inflation is not going to slow down the way we'd hoped it would. So you're right, Leon, we may well get some kind of downturn in the next 6 months, or at least a slowdown or something like that. And I think you're seeing that. You don't have quite the robustness of the job market you used to have.
Right.
You used to have, the high-tech firms in California were paying people $150,000 just to keep them on the payroll. They didn't have anything for me to do, but they didn't want to lose it. They were, quote, hoarding labor. I'm reading that's not happening so much anymore.
Yeah. In fact, I've seen a lot of local, big companies like Intel and others dropping a lot of staff right now.
Yeah.
So it's, so they're saying that, hey, these unemployment numbers are great, but maybe we're just starting to get over the edge of the cliff. I don't know. But
I always hope there's not a recession. And the joke is economists have predicted 6 out of the last 2 recessions. We're always predicting recessions.
So I had a quick question for you, because since you're an economist, this is something that I've really struggled with. But and Jane, maybe you could bring back this visual real quick of the Fred CPI rate here. We see this really sharp, steep increase here happening when some of the impacts of that shutting down of, that was a perfect storm in a sense. You were dumping trillions into the economy, and you were telling people stay home and don't make anything.
Yeah,
and at the same time,
and you're surprised prices go up. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I'm kind of shocked that I guess that it wasn't worse than it was. I really thought that, we might have hit the Titanic, might have hit the iceberg on all this, and we didn't. And I'm just curious what your thoughts were on what happened.
One of the things I think is really interesting, and I've gone back and forth on this in 50 years, I think fiscal policy, just giving people a bunch of money, was probably the cause of it, because that ended up influencing things. I used to be an old-fashioned monetarist. It's all the Federal Reserve, but I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. They put a lot of reserves in the bank, and since 2008, this is a little secret, they made it almost impossible to fail in banking, because they now pay banks interest on the reserves they hold. They didn't used to do that. So now it's kind of maybe a little sloppier in monetary policy. So it's fiscal policy that ended up doing that. I would just say the resilience of the supply chain and the natural economy is pretty strong. And that's why it didn't go as bad. I thought the same thing too. I thought we might get up to like 19-20% inflation.
Yeah.
Yes.
It only peaked out at 9.1, and then it became to slowly, gradually come down. Thanks be to God. But it's not going to get to 2% as fast as we hoped it would.
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
going to be the problem. That's going to be the problem. But yeah, it's very complicated in terms of what's going to. And again, there's this huge statistical problem. All you can do is take samples. So one inflation measure may show one thing, another one something a little different. And when you're dealing with, tenths of percents mattering, you maybe want to be a little suspicious of any economic statistic. But I think the Fed's going to have to stay tight for a while. And eventually, the big thing that shocked a lot of people is this big increase in interest rates. If you go to a bank, you can't borrow. Nobody can borrow at 2% anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that's got to put a crimp on things at some point. That's the whole point. So you have to do. But it seems to me 2% interest rate's not viable in the long run. You really do want an interest rate around 5%. But
Well, this sort of brings us up to, I guess, our knucklehead noise patrol near the end of the program here. And that's also related to inflation here. And it has to do with our commander-in-chief's personal views, I guess, about inflation and shrinkflation. He specifically labeled it as. And this was an ad that was put out. And in a way, this part of it was brilliant, I thought. They put this ad out on Twitter during the Super Bowl, so they didn't have to pay for any huge rates, but somehow it got a lot of eyeballs just because everybody knew it was coming out during the Super Bowl, so they went over to Twitter and watched it. So that part actually was a stroke of genius, I guess, a rare stroke of genius by the Biden administration, I think. But it was Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual here. But the point of the thing is what I thought is a big sort of misunderstanding. At least that's the way I took it on his part. He looked at this issue of the shrinkflation, which is essentially the products just shrinking, and so that they can keep the price the same on the shelf or keep it from rising too much. And so, Jane, maybe you can bring up the video real quick so people can see that short ad that he played.
The Super Bowl Sunday. If you're anything like me, you like to be surrounded by a snack or two while watching the big game. When buying snacks for the game, you might have noticed one thing. Sports drinks bottles are smaller. A bag of chips has fewer chips, but they're still charging you just as much. And as an ice cream lover, what makes me the most angry is that ice cream cartons have actually shrunk in size, but not in price. I've had enough of what they call shrinkflation. It's a ripoff. Some companies are trying to pull a fast one by shrinking the products little by little and hoping you won't notice. Give me a break. The American public is tired of being played for suckers. I'm calling on companies to put a stop to this. Let's make sure businesses do the right thing now.
Well, and
oh my God.
Exactly. I was appalled when I saw this because
exactly.
I mean it's like blaming companies for
corporate
his tampering with the money supply.
And does he really believe? I think he might. But I think that's insane. It's that's insane. It's like that greed is the cause of inflation. You always get this with gas prices. Why are gas prices going up? Because big corporations and oil companies are really greedy, and it's the greed. Then why do they reduce prices? Do they stop being greedy? Do they wake up and go, oh, I'm so sorry I was greedy, I'll lower price?
Yes, of course.
That's the thing that causes it. And that's shameless on Biden's part. That's just shameless. I mean, he ought to take response. Man up, Biden. It's your inflation. The general, it's another manifestation of the same thing. Prices are going up, and it's really interesting. The people that do keep the inflation statistics do keep track of that. So the inflation statistics do have that in there. I checked that out a couple of years ago. They figured that out, and that's the honest number. As much as I'm skeptical of government, I think the people that keep the numbers in government, the gnomes in Washington D.C. that actually collect the data, do a pretty honest job of it. And I would give them credit on that because they do try to catch things like that.
Yeah, I've seen that the CBO, like they put out the GDP, the debt to GDP, and they show that really headed out. And a lot of people, I think, respect their numbers because they realize that, hey, they're not really spinning it. They're saying, hey, look, if you guys don't take care of this, we're going off the rails in the future. And yet, once it goes out of their hands and into the politicians' hands, those numbers become debased.
That's right. That's right. And since kids don't learn math or statistics anymore, they're not going to understand it anyway.
Exactly.
They don't believe that kind of nonsense. That we just bad corporations are making your snacks smaller.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's funny, talking about, especially about gasoline prices. We have many laws on the books, both at the state level and at the federal level, about collusion.
Yeah.
So the companies now, so listen to what's going on here. Biden and company want these companies to collude to bring down prices, and then they'll prosecute them for collusion.
Right.
God help us with this damn nonsense.
Well, this is the thing. Every 2 years, somebody in Congress is going to do a big investigation of whether the gas companies and the oil companies are colluding on price, and they never get anything on it. There's never any clear evidence that that's what they're doing. Exactly. And it makes sense. There's probably no market that's more competitive than retail gas, because people can see it. You can see on your cell phones where gas is cheaper, and people move around. And in order to get the trade, so you can sell the snacks and the sodas where you really make the money, that's the most competitive market in the world. So the notion
Cecil, to jump in on that as well. I mean, we're in California, and we see this almost every year as summer rolls around. California requires a special blend here during the summer, and so you wind up then essentially limiting the supply in the summer that is available to you. And once a refinery goes down for maintenance or anything else, suddenly the prices shoot up because there's little supply and constant or increasing demand going into the summer. And so, it's predictable that the prices are going to go up. And yet the government, politicians, generally Democrats, almost always said there's going to be an investigation and we're going to hold these people accountable for raising their prices. It's like completely disconnected to supply and demand. These politicians, it's like they've never heard of it before.
Right.
You always hear big oil, the greed of big oil. We got to do something about it. The greed of big oil, and they go on and on every summer. You're right.
Yeah. Well, I think we've about beaten inflation into the ground, at least on this show. Hopefully that'll happen outside of the show. But Jane, maybe you could bring up Cecil's pages again real quick here. So if you want to go read more about some of Cecil's articles, you can find it here at an Indianapolis Business Journal, and read some of the stuff that he's writing about. And Cecil, do you have any last thoughts before we leave the show?
Well, again, I hope we get to 2% inflation, and I hope whatever happens after November, we can de-weaponize the justice system, so that we're not acting like a bunch of junior high school kids just trying to knock everybody out, and our government can actually function. I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm a little more amenable after this discussion to thinking, well, maybe RFK wouldn't be a bad president. Crazy balloon, but look, whatever happens, it's going to be entertaining. Because you get Biden in there, well, he's a big joke. You get Trump in there, he's crazy. I'm just sorry that America's alternative isn't going to be sort of the classical liberal common sense that I think most people believe in. But you've got this wave of populism, and it's very strange how that's worked, because it hasn't particularly worked that well for the left. Right-wing populism, it's shocked me how powerful that's been.
Well, Cecil, when you talk about that final point about maybe the country becoming less divided by RFK. As a libertarian, there was one other thing I just wanted to throw in here at the last second, and that's that, as the government continues to grow bigger and have a bigger footprint in our lives, that's what is also, kind of some of the division. There's more at stake every time, and that's one of the problems with RFK, even though he would, in the short term, be a lot more civil than what we're seeing from the other two parties. I think in the long term, if you keep growing government, more is at stake every time.
Right. I think that's a very trenchant and very insightful analysis, Jason. That's exactly right. The size of the government is going to tell you something about the degree of the rancor, because the more is at stake with public decisions, given people's time horizons and their ability to understand what's going on. The more you put into that public sector, the more you politicize things, the nastier it becomes. And the whole thing is free transactions between free people. You leave them alone, you let them be free and solve their own problems. They can usually do it. That's what we're all based on.
And that's an important point. That's such an important point, Cecil. But you know what is really happening? You see, we are being placed into these little boxes, all of us. This one is black, this one is straight, this one is gay, and all these different little boxes. This is Hispanic. Those little boxes are going to be used to divide and conquer.
Yes.
And that is what is happening. And that is the unfortunate thing about all of this. So it's no longer that here I am Leon Brathwaite. That is not the case. I am black. That's what the most important thing is, which is so insulting to me, you would not believe, so offensive to me, you would not believe.
And collectivist.
Yes, exactly. But these boxes that they're putting us into is nothing but to divide us and to conquer us.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think the government is so dangerous in our lives right now.
Well, hopefully in 2024 we can get the victory, or excuse me, Liberty can eke out a little bit of victory somehow. But that's pretty much the end of our show. And thanks so much for joining us, Cecil. And for those of you
thanks for having me. Enjoyed it a lot. Good to see you again, Leon.
Same here, Cecil. I really did enjoy it. I hope at some point in time we can have you back again. I hope so.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Indeed.
And for those of you watching out there, stay tuned next week. We're going to have Larry Sands on to talk about education going on in California, some educational issues and things he's been writing about. But until the next week, if you're watching out there, think about what you can do in your community to advance the ball for liberty, because, boy, I tell you, we really need everybody who sees this in the game. We need all men on all people on deck. So, like I said, you can check out some of our other shows on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook, and see conversations we've had with other people who've been fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. So until next week, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.